Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Josie, but I go by Dr. Joe for short. I really do a lot of work in terms of testing. So I help a lot of people who are struggling in school to get proper accommodations or help or remediation that they need. And then I also provide therapy services, and I work with a wide range of clients dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and things that kind of fall around that ballpark. So,
of course, as my sis already said, thank you so much for having us. My name is Dr. Dyona, and I'm currently a psychologist working in South Florida. I see a range of clients, some teens, adults, and even older adults. And basically, my goal is just to help people to address their mental health needs and to make sure that everyone has access to adequate care in spite of their race, culture, ethnic background, and so on and so forth.
I'm so excited to have you guys, and today we'll be talking about how to handle the fear of commitment in relationships.
fear of commitment is usually something that the person has to deal with themselves. Like, it's very difficult for someone to change that about you because there's a lot of factors that usually contribute to a fear of commitment. So lots of times you have people who may have a fear of commitment, and it's related to their family background. So let's say early on in their relationships, maybe even as babies, they never felt a sense of trust with their caregivers. That already puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to commitment, because the first people who were there in your life, who were supposed to consistently be there, were not there. Right. So at that point, there's a fear associated with trusting someone, which of course impacts your ability to commit to relationships. And sometimes that is further compounded by the fact that if, let's say, based on the difficulties in your relationships with your parents, in forming new relationships, you carry over those same difficulties, it further complicates it, because now you may attribute every failed relationship to, oh, well, people can't be trusted, or this won't be long term, or I have to protect myself because of XYZ, but you don't recognize different ways that you may be contributing to the problem, or how you may be self-sabotaging the relationships that you have. So if it's from that aspect, that is one way that you might have a fear of commitment. Other people, it may be due to like poor decision making. So you're not necessarily getting with the right people for whatever reason, either past traumas, poor decisions, you didn't have a good example of how to choose, or you just don't know what to look for. And in having multiple failed relationships, you now have a fear to commit. So it all depends on that. I don't know if Yona wants to add a little bit more to that. I call her Yona. I'm sorry, guys. Dr.
It's okay, Yona. But what I was going to add, and just to kind of piggyback off of what Dr. Joe said, one of the things we have to remember is our early interactions with our parents, siblings, teachers, caregivers, people who interact with us when we're children and even teens. It is the blueprint for how we interact with people in the future. So going back to what Josie said, if growing up you did not seek commitment, maybe your parents were divorced or separated, maybe you never knew your mom, maybe you never knew your dad, maybe the people in your family or in your friendships kept leaving, they would abandon you. Why in the world will you put yourself in a place for that to happen again? So sometimes when clients come into therapy, all they're seeing it as is, oh, something's wrong with me, I can't commit. And what I try to do is get them out of that judgmental or shaming perspective to figure out, where is this coming from? So don't just be down on yourself because you have a fear of commitment. Let's actually mentally walk back in time to figure out what is precipitating or triggering the fear of commitment. Once you understand it, then you can start to figure out, what steps do I have to take to change it so that I can not only commit, but make sure I choose the right person.
Okay, so the first thing is actually just knowing that you have the fear of commitment, right?
Right.
Because, yeah, knowing you do have a fear of commitment, and then from there, you kind of like try to figure out why, like what caused it.
Yes, where it's coming
But
from.
then for people that are maybe just in denial, how do you even deal with those people? Because at first, they don't even want to accept that they have it.
I think that's actually a little bit tricky, which is what I was saying from before in terms of when it's the other person who has the problem, it's a lot more difficult because it's a personal thing. So, for example, even if you would tell them you have a fear of commitment, they probably wouldn't accept it from you, as opposed to, let's say there's someone on the outside who's objective, like even like a therapist, because I've actually had clients who they've been told they have a fear of commitment, but they don't believe it. But then when they come in to see me and they tell me certain things and I start to see a pattern, then I'll kind of put it out there. You seem to have a fear of commitment. At which point, now they're looking quizzically and they're like, you know, people have told me that before, but I never saw it. But now, because you're someone who doesn't know them at all, and you're saying the same thing that multiple people have said, it's like now they can give an ounce of credibility to it. But before, they will deny until they get to maybe a point in time where I've seen this happen, where if they have a very significant relationship that they don't want to lose and they've lost it, then it dawns on them, I have a fear of commitment because this was a great relationship and I still let it pass me by.
So does this have anything to do with how much the person loves the other person, or it really doesn't matter?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it can depend, okay? Because there are some people who are incapable of committing, and then there are people who struggle with committing.
Right.
So let's say, for example, you might have someone who, I know that this is a word that a lot of people are throwing out right now, but let's say you're dealing with a narcissist, okay? Narcissists don't view the people that they're in a relationship with as a person. They view them as an object. So they'll commit as long as they need to get what they need to get from you, okay? As opposed to a person who has a fear of or difficulty committing because of something from their past, they could genuinely love you. But because of their scars from the past, they're unable to commit and move forward. So when you have a fear of commitment or any other issue, it's like you're carrying around a lot of luggage. So if you see a therapist, the therapist can help you to unpack that luggage so that you can be free. Right. So just because a person has a fear of commitment does not necessarily mean that they don't love you.
Right. And I think it also ties into, like, there's different types of personality disorders. And I think that most people may be aware of like narcissistic or borderline personality. But there's actually other personality disorders such as schizoid and avoidant personality disorders. And for schizoid personality disorders, you may have someone who just kind of shows a disinterest in relationships and it's just not their thing. So they're not interested in committing. As opposed to some people will confuse that with avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant personality disorder, on the other hand, suggests that you may want a commitment, but your fear of losing the relationship or your fear of being abandoned or your fear of whatever it might be is preventing you from reaching out and having those relationships as you would like to have them. So one is more so disinterest and the other is more so fear-based. At which point, then you know the commitment issue is not really due to, you know, I'm just not interested and I just kind of want to live my life. It's more so I want this so bad, but I'm so afraid of losing it that I can't take that risk, if that makes sense.
When I'm looking at it from that point at all, you know, when I just think about the fear of commitment, I'm like, they don't really love that person and they don't just want to be with that person. And then I was thinking about, for some people, they may be okay committing to a relationship. You just want to date forever. But when it comes to like taking it to marriage, then that fear just comes out from nowhere. So
yes.
in that case, maybe it's probably also, like you said, something from their childhood. You know, maybe something happened with their parents and they just feel like, well, relationships are okay. But once it gets to that union of marriage, then I don't want to be there. I don't want to commit because
Right.
what happened to my parents or something may also happen to me, or something like that. So
And it also ties into what Dr. Dyona was saying earlier about object relations. So a lot of people don't realize this, but when you have something that happens that's atypical when you're growing up in your early childhood, whatever it might be, you tend to view people as objects. You don't see them as whole persons.
Yep.
So that's why you may see that they cycle through many different people, or they may attach to someone at one point in time, and next thing you know, they're attached to another. Because I'm getting this like financial security from this person. I'm getting my physical needs met with this person. I'm getting my emotional needs met from this person. I'm getting, if you need food or something, I'm getting that met by this person. So now you have it where you have relationships with all of these different people, but in reality, your relationships are very shallow. Because the only point of those relationships are to get whatever needs you have met. And in that sense, it's easy to use people and then toss them.
Yes.
Because once the need is met, I don't need you anymore.
And I'm sure we've seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. That makes sense. You said something about the person that can really help is the person experiencing the problem, because that takes me to like one of the questions. So I ran a poll on Twitter and I said, I put some answers. Which of this would you do if your partner has a fear of relationship? How would you help them? So, and then one person was, let me look at for her questions. She said, how do you help someone that does not want to be helped?
I'm going to tell a very corny joke here because I think it fits. The joke says, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 1, but the light bulb has to want to change.
That's true.
So the reality is, when you love and care about someone, you want the best for them.
Yeah.
So if you notice that there's something that they need to work on, you'll bring it up, you'll talk to them about it. Maybe you'll mention it to someone else who you think can help bring about that change, but they have to want it themselves.
Right.
And if the person does not recognize that they have a problem, chances are they're not going to respond well when you try to call them out on it. And as a matter of fact, when we're dealing with people, for example, who have personality disorders, they don't even necessarily respond well when a therapist tells them. Like, there has to be some kind of insight into the behavior and then a willingness to change. But you cannot force someone else to change just because you see their potential and all of the ways that they can better themselves. It doesn't work. It just frustrates both of you.
Yeah,
I honestly think the best thing you can do is kind of, I would say if you're seeing a therapist, they might be more open to it, but encouraging them to get, some type of help for the issues that they're dealing with. That might be the best option and possibly the only option in terms of getting them to change, because you can't unpack everything to know where this is coming from, because oftentimes it's not just a matter of I observed all of these failed relationships, or I didn't have a good relationship with family, friends, teachers, siblings, etc. All of that affects your psyche. It affects you in terms of your self-esteem, your self-confidence. So there are certain things, if you don't, for example, love yourself, it's going to be hard for you to even believe someone would want to commit to you, for you to in turn to commit to them. So there are certain things where you really have to take the time to let them have their own exploration. And even as a therapist, that's important. And you have to be very patient, because you may want your client to get somewhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to get to the place that you want them to be. So keeping in mind that these people may have long-standing self-esteem, self-confidence issues that need to be worked through before they get to a place where they can feel like I can commit to someone. Because sometimes people will take it, like the partners will take it to mean I'm not good enough for this person to commit to. Whereas the person who has the commitment issue may either feel fearful, or they feel like as if I don't believe someone can truly love me, or they may feel like as if I don't deserve a good relationship, or they may just be used to the dysfunction that they were raised in. And because of that, even if there's a better alternative, they will choose the dysfunction because I'm comfortable with the dysfunction. I know what to expect. So that makes it a lot easier than trying out something new.
That's true. Being comfortable in dysfunction, it's something that everyone has done, but some people do it for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you want to talk to them about it, at what point do you bring this up? Like, if they don't tell you, but you notice that they do. Because you know how some people are just in a relationship and one person wants you to move forward, and they just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm like, there's something going on here. So at what point do you step in and, be like, I feel like something may be going on. I feel like you may have this.
I think in terms of timing, it varies from person to person. So I have had people who have come in for therapy and they're in that place where they're in a relationship, they want it to move forward and their partner just isn't budging. Some of them will say, I have this age in my head.
Yeah.
By 30, I want to be married. Yeah. Others will say, I don't necessarily want to be married, but, by a year, I would like to be engaged. So it varies from person to person. I think everyone needs to figure out what is my limit ahead of time. Don't wait until you're in a relationship to be figuring out when you've reached your limit. You want to know going into the relationship, by when do we want to have the talk? By when do we want to, define the relationship or talk about what we are to each other? Are we exclusive? Are we not? Like, have a timeline in your head. And then if that doesn't happen, you want to have a conversation with your partner, not in an accusatory way, not in an aggressive way where you're putting them down, where you're attacking them for not having moved forward or proposed or whatever it is. You want to have a conversation that comes across as, I want to understand. What are you thinking? When you look at our relationship, where do you see us being in 6 months, a year, 5 years, to figure out where their head is at? And then that could be kind of you putting your foot in the door so that you can open up the wider topic of commitment issues if that's something that you feel that they're struggling with.
The other thing that I would add is more so for the person to kind of take a look at themselves a little bit more closely, because sometimes we're looking at the person who won't make the commitment, but sometimes we need to ask ourselves, why do we stay in relationships for such a long time for people who won't commit? Because that usually signals something, whether you recognize it or not, when it comes to your self-esteem, your self-confidence, whatever it may be. Because you can see that a relationship is going nowhere fast, and yet you stay, and it will be for years. So it's almost like now you have lost time. You've invested so much into that relationship that you feel that you can't let go. But sometimes it's important for us to ask ourselves, why can't we let go? Why are we stuck in a relationship with someone who won't commit to us? And we need to kind of see, is there a reason? Is it that I feel like I can't find someone else? Is it that I'm fearful of starting over? Or is it that you have a pattern? Do you constantly or consistently attach to people who are unavailable to commit to you? And if so, that might signal an even deeper issue, because deep down inside, as much as you think you want a commitment, you may not be ready for one, which is why you're always attaching to people who are unavailable to you.
That's true. So this, I have a very funny one. So this person apparently thinks their girlfriend has a fear of commitment, but then they're thinking having a baby together might change her and make her commit, because she wouldn't have anywhere to go. Like, she wouldn't have an option but to commit to him. So I don't know how that sounds, because
I know it's not going to work.
You know, I think one of the things we have to understand when it comes to relationships, it's two individuals coming together in a partnership, okay? If you notice that you're constantly moving towards a person and they're constantly moving back in terms of not wanting to commit when you want to commit, adding a baby to that, it's like oil and water. They don't go together, okay? If someone has a stab wound, you don't come at them with a Band-Aid. It's not going to fix anything. It might temporarily appear to hold it together, but long term, it's not going to work. So I think if he recognizes that his partner, his girlfriend, doesn't want to commit, there needs to be a greater conversation about what is keeping her from committing. Is it that she is unwilling to? If she's unwilling, why is she unwilling? Is there something that she thinks needs to change before she'll be willing to commit? Or is she incapable of committing? Does she have a trauma history? Does she have, as Dr. Joe mentioned earlier, attachment issues? Is there something that is stopping her from being able to commit? They have to work that out before they even think about adding kids. Because if you add a baby, that's 18 years with a person who has always been iffy about commitment. In a sense, he would actually be adding the ball and chain to himself, not knowing where his girlfriend stands.
Yes.
Yeah, it's most likely is not going to get her to stay or commit. And honestly, you can't even be sure she's going to commit to that baby the way that she should. Usually when someone has an issue, we might assume it's in one area, but usually that issue cuts globally. So someone who has trouble committing in relationships may have trouble committing in other areas as well. And I don't mean just relationships, but even when it comes to things like work, they might have trouble committing to a specific career or specific duties or whatever it may be. Or they might start a lot of things, but they don't finish them. So most likely what you'll see is a repeat of the same pattern. It's just now there's a baby involved, which of course complicates things, at which point he may not even want to commit to his girlfriend anymore, which will do kind of like the opposite. But I really think that in that case, you kind of just have to let that person go through their own process so that they get to a point where they're ready to commit, whether it's with you or with someone else, and you just kind of focus on yourself or moving on.
Yeah. I think the moving on part is a big piece that people forget. You know, sometimes we get into the habit of trying to fix the person we're in the relationship with, as opposed to recognizing when it's time to cut our losses and move on. And I think that's something that people struggle with, but you can end up wasting a lot of time, a lot of emotional energy in a relationship that's going nowhere.
Right.
So that's actually, so when I ran that poll on Twitter, if I would have had to guess, I would have thought most people would say they were going to help. But I had an option that said leave. And most people said they were going to leave. Yes, most people said they were going to leave. And that was quite surprising to me, because I thought most people were going to help. We're going to say, okay, I'm going to try to help you. I'm going to try to help her. But like a whooping 48% just said they were going to leave. And I'm like, oh God, y'all are nice.
Well, you never know. The 48% that said they're going to leave, they might have already been in a relationship like this. So they're like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I wasted 5 years of my life. I'm not there anymore. So it could be that too. But I am surprised that roughly half would say that.
That was where I got one of these questions that said, how do you even help them if they don't want to be helped? You know,
right?
So that was kind of interesting, because for personally, the first thing that came to me was, I was just trying to help, like find ways to help them, you know, try to be nice or try to get them in therapy, try to talk to them.
Right.
But most were like, no, I'm not dealing with that. No.
I mean,
That
it
is
is a
just,
lot to
that,
deal
no,
with.
that's too much. Yeah.
You don't know where it's going to go. Like, let's say you can get them into therapy and they can resolve the issue and still leave you. Like, you don't know which way it's going to go. So I'm thinking that's why people are kind of like, I don't even want to take the risk. I'd rather just be with someone who will commit to me. But, you know, sometimes, like we said, commitment issues is due to personal factors. Other times it could just be that this person is kind of just playing around with you and they don't see you as being a serious partner, which is when you kind of have to ask yourself, so why am I staying in this relationship? So, for example, going back to for the narcissist example, maybe he's not looking to commit because, you know, he's just using you for whatever reason. So then it becomes you know, let's say this narcissist goes to therapy, and in the middle of therapy, he kind of recognizes that you're not actually who he wants to end up with. Now it's like you helped him, it didn't end up helping you the way that you thought it would. But that's always a possibility, to the point where if we're seeing couples, or if we start seeing an individual that's in a relationship, we actually have to tell them, by doing therapy and it's just one of you, you do run the risk of the relationship falling apart. Even if both of them are doing individual, they run the risk of the relationship falling apart, because as you get to know yourself, value what you want, value what you know need, you might recognize that that's not in the person that you're with.
That would really suck, because it's like you were trying to help
Right.
to get the commitment that you want, and at the end of the day, the whole thing just falls apart and it's gone. So at that point, you're like, maybe I shouldn't have helped. This person asked if their partner has a fear of commitment, if they should get their friends and families involved. Should they get other people involved to like help them out?
So one of the things I always tell people when they say, I want to do this, I'll ask them, if the tables were reversed and someone did this to you, how would you feel? So if you would feel okay with your partner getting all of your family and friends together to basically tell you that you have a commitment issue, go ahead and do that. But if you think that there is a part of you that would be a little embarrassed or mortified or whatever it is about that, you have to think of another way. One of the things that I always tell people, the easiest way to help someone to better themselves in terms of changing fear of commitment or whatever else it is encouraging them to go to therapy. And when I say encouraging them to go to therapy, I don't mean you're in the middle of an argument and you say, you need therapy. Not going to work. What I do mean is the two of you, as I said earlier, having an open conversation where it's all about fostering understanding of the other person and their perspective. Then, if you notice that you guys don't seem to be getting anywhere, you can either say, you know, what would you think about the two of us going to counseling together? Because when you do it like that, you're phrasing it in a way where it's not me against you, it's the two of us against the problem. And having an objective outside counselor can help us to address that. You can also say to them, you know, if there are things that you don't want me to know about, you should definitely speak to someone. You know, it doesn't have to be me, but someone that you trust about this, you know, this type of thing, you can talk to them. But in general, bringing in family and friends, it can go left real quick. So I would say kind of hold off on that and just try to figure out, what can I do to foster understanding, let my partner know that I want to understand where they're coming from, and then figuring out what are the best steps to help.
That makes sense. And I know one of the questions was just, is there a cure for this?
I think that's a funny word to use. Is there a cure? Do I think that a person can overcome commitment issues? Of course. That's the business that we're in, is helping people to better themselves, helping people to figure out, where am I now and where would I like to be in the future? But going back to the thing that we said earlier, the person has to want to change. So I have in the past had a person come in for therapy and tell me, I'm only here because my boyfriend or my wife or my girlfriend or my husband said I have to be. I'm not going to work with someone like that. Okay? Because what's going to happen is I'm going to do all of the work. You're just going to sit there like a sponge and suck up whatever is in the room. I'll tell them, you know, I can understand you said your partner wants you to be here. It's obvious that you have a lot of affection and respect for your partner that you came. But if I'm going to work with you, I need to know that you're invested. So either we're going to work on something you think that you need to work on, or you can come back when you're ready. Most of them, they don't come back because the reality is they don't think they have a problem.
That's true.
It's their partner who thinks that. So I would say if you notice that you're in a situation like that, you have to talk it out with your partner. But if you notice they're not open to change, they're not open to your opinion about what is wrong in the relationship and how it's not moving forward, you really have to, as Dr. Joe said earlier, think about, is this where I want to be long term? Because if they're not budging now, who's to say they'll budge in 3 months, 6 months, a year? I've known so many people who just kept waiting, hoping that the person would commit, and they never did. And of course, time waits for no one.
And then sometimes you'll find, kind of related to what we were saying earlier too, is that they couldn't commit to you. You guys were together 9 years. And then next year they're married to someone else. And you're like, huh?
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of said, you know, there really is, like Dyona was saying before, no cure for it. You can definitely work on it, but you have to see where's a person's level of motivation at that time. Because maybe when they were with you, it was kind of like what Dr. Dyona was saying, you know, I'm fine. I'm not at that place. I don't see that I have a problem. But let's say, you know, the relationship ends, or after a series of failed relationships, they're now like, I need to work on myself because, you know, something's wrong, whatever. They decide to work on themselves. They could be committed to someone in 1 to 2 years, at which point you're kind of like, well, why couldn't they commit to me? But it depends on where they were at that time. So you can't necessarily put a time frame or a timetable on when someone will, you know, overcome their fear of commitment or when things will get better. So if you decide to stay within a relationship like that, it's a risk that you take. But in general, I definitely do believe that people can overcome that fear, but they have to be at the point where they want to overcome it. And by want, I don't just mean saying, I want to get over my fear of commitment. I mean wanting and being ready to put in the work. And that is huge, because sometimes you have clients who come in and they say, I want to change and I want to get over this. But you will notice that whenever something is either done in therapy or it's kind of assigned for them to do throughout the week, for some reason, they can never follow through with it. In session, there's an issue. Outside of session, there's an issue. At which point, a good therapist is actually going to call that out, where they kind of notice there's a bit of resistance going on here, because while you're saying this to me, your actions are telling me X, Y, Z. And that is kind of like a therapeutic confrontation, but it's not meant to hurt the person in therapy. It's meant to kind of either make you reevaluate where you really are or propel you towards that change. If you're kind of like on the precipice of it, but you just haven't necessarily gone over, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I did want to add to what my sister was saying. Sometimes it takes someone else bringing something to your attention. I remember even recently I was consulting with my sister on a case that I had where I had a client who was saying that they wanted to be in therapy, but there were chronically issues coming up that was stopping them from making it to their sessions. And my sister is the one who said, it sounds like there's some resistance here. And I was like, you think so? Because, you know, they said X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then my sister's like, yes, but what are they actually doing? At which point I'm like, you know, my sister has a point. Went and spoke to the client, who then eventually we paused therapy because I recognized they weren't ready. So they were saying one thing, but they were doing something else. So when it comes to our relationships, if we think that a person has a commitment issue, we can't just trust what they're saying. we have to actually look at their behavior, their actions, and don't just trust the words that are coming out of their mouth.
If you just randomly say to them, oh, you need therapy, can that not help them? Because would that not make them really like sit back and be like, is something wrong with me?
No, go ahead.
What I was going to say is there's nothing wrong with suggesting to a person that they get therapy, but when you say you need therapy, there is an undercurrent of judgment, condescending, patronizing attitude there, where it kind of suggests that you are defective and you need to be fixed, as opposed to recognizing this is a person that I love and care about. So if they do have a problem, I want them to address it. So this is not me attacking them and telling them you need therapy as if they're like a broken doll that needs to be taken to the hospital. It's more of, I just recognize that, committing is something that's very difficult for you. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but it might be helpful for you to talk it over with an outside observer, not family, not friends. You don't have to worry about gossip. You don't have to worry about judgment or shaming or anything like that. So it's how you say it as opposed to what you say.
Right. And that's the point that I was actually going to tap on, in terms of sometimes it's not the message that you say as much as it is how you communicate that message. Because a lot of people forget that there are multiple layers to communication. So you can say something and it's received well, but you can also say something and based on your tone or based on the timing or based on how you phrase it, it now comes across as something that makes the person feel defensive. And when someone feels defensive, it's very difficult for them to hear anything that you have to say. Because if they feel defensive, now they want to attack you because they feel the need to defend themselves. Or they can't hear what it is that you're saying because there is now a mental block that is preventing them from absorbing the information that you gave to them. So sometimes, even with my clients, because I have clients who will say things in anger, and it's almost like we're trying to learn not to speak things when we're in anger. So for example, if you've had an argument with your partner and you recognize that there's a fear of commitment, that's not the right time to talk about it. Wait until you've both calmed down and you can have a conversation where you say, there was something that happened earlier that I wanted to talk about it because I didn't want it to, go unfinished, or whatever it is that you want to say, because both of you will be in a better place to hear the message coming from the other person, as opposed to if you're both heated and now is when you're having a conversation. So sometimes I'll tell my clients, if your goal was to anger them and not have them hear anything that you said, you've achieved your goal. However, if your goal was to actually get them to hear you and to understand your concerns, then you need to go about it a different way, because people cannot hear you when you're yelling at them, when you're screaming at them, when you have a condescending tone, when you're patronizing them, when you're sarcastically dismissive of them. All of those things are white noise that's impacting the communication that's happening at that time.
That's true. One of the things that I've also found is this: everyone assumes this is more in men than in women. But interestingly, like when we talked about it the other time, it was a lot of women that actually said, I do have fear of commitment. And I was like, wow, I did see a lot of women talk about it. And it was just, for me, it was really the self-awareness. Because I see that one of the first steps is actually knowing, understanding what's going on. That was so interesting that a lot of women have that fear of commitment. Because, most times people just assume women are always ready for relationships and always ready for marriage, always looking for marriage.
I think, though, you mentioned how, in general, women are always looking for marriage. Mm-hmm. Marriage is a sign of the commitment. So in reality, for women, it's not necessarily just about the ring in marriage as much as it is about feeling secure. And I think that's why you probably noticed that multiple women were saying they have that issue too. It is wanting to feel secure in that relationship. So many women have grown up in less than ideal circumstances where they grew up not feeling secure. Maybe they didn't have the father in the home. Maybe they didn't have their mom in the home. Maybe their parents were together but constantly fighting. Maybe they were divorced. Maybe they were separated. Maybe they didn't have good relationships with family. Maybe they didn't get along with friends at school. Maybe they did get along with friends and then they stabbed them in the back. All of these things will affect a woman's sense of security. So a lot of times a guy will just think, oh, my girl is always talking about rings and marriage and, commitment. But what he doesn't really recognize is she wants to feel safe and secure in the relationship. Mm-hmm. So she wants to know you're not going anywhere. She wants to know that you are fully committed. If she's in 100%, you're in 100%. And that's what I think a lot of times guys miss.
Right. And I'll add something briefly, though, because I noticed there's a comment where they don't want to lose the live, so we won't go over.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But yes, I think, too, that one of the biggest things for women is we have to become better judges of character a lot of times. And sometimes it's that we don't have someone to really teach us what to look for. Sometimes it has to do with, kind of starting early. So, of course, as a teen or, as a young adult, your judgment skills may not necessarily be where they should be, of course. Sure. And a lot of people don't notice how much of that is developmental. So your brain actually just does not have the capacity to reason when you're a teen the same way that you can as an adult. So if you're a woman who has started relationships early on, the part of your brain that is developed more is the part that's related to the limbic system, which is where your emotions are seated. Mm-hmm. So here you are making all of these emotional decisions. So when you kind of get crossed in relationships, you start to attribute all of these characteristics where you're like, men always do this, or my partner always does this, or whatever, and things like that. And then next thing you know, now it becomes a fear of commitment because you feel like everyone is bad, everybody's a dog, or whatever it might be. But you don't recognize that your judgment for those relationships were poor, and you have to learn from those experiences. That doesn't mean you avoid relationships or commitment altogether. It just means you take the information that you learned in these prior relationships, and now you use it in future decision making so that you don't make the same mistakes when you do commit to someone. Now I'm not looking for this, I'm not looking for this, I'm not looking for this. Instead, I'm looking for X, Y, Z, because I know that if I meet someone like this, then we can form a commitment, and now the relationship can move forward.
I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot of new things that I wasn't even thinking of. We have to do this again some other time. Thank you guys so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having us, and we're looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow at the Mental Health Sisters too.
Yes. Bye.